Okay, but
I thought it was.
I just want to say one thing.
No, wait.
Okay.
All
right.
Jimmy, Obaid, and Zara. I just want to hear from Faye because Faye, you felt really passionate about this, right?
Yeah.
Right, and you felt like we weren't doing much. So I want to hear now what you feel, Faye.
My gripe was that no one from our community was talking about it. Like, I didn't care what your opinions were. It was more the fact that it wasn't being addressed. That's what I had a problem with.
Can you see why I didn't speak now, Faye?
No, I get it. I totally get it.
How did it go, guys? What did you think of it?
Yeah, it was okay.
It was intense, but it was
uploaded. I think it was unfair on Faye.
Yeah, we needed more Faye.
Why did you feel it was unfair?
Did you feel like we were talking about something? I felt like we were talking about completely different things, so it wasn't.
Yeah, no, but Faye was the only one on the opposite side of it.
I know. I know. Faye, did you feel like we were like overtaking you?
I feel like I don't know. Oh, it was more so like when you like sent me the link to the debate, like the Intelligence Squared debate, right? And you were like, "Oh, let's have a conversation." I thought it was just gonna be a hangout. I didn't like. It wasn't until a couple of days ago that I realized, oh, this is a live.
It was live.
Yeah.
Have you guys got masks?
I've got a one that I tie up. Yeah.
I've just got like the disposable kind. Like, if I'm going out, like, because I go outside, just get out of my apartment, whatever. But just around the block and stuff, I don't wear it. If I'm going to the store, I wear it. If I'm gonna, like, there's times when I got to go to the hospital for checkups and stuff, because like diabetic and this and that. I will take the subway and I wear it in the subway, but there's, it's usually like one or two people in the whole car. So you could be at opposite ends and it's not, but still it's a subway, it's enclosed. So things like that, I'll wear it, but.
I clicked on go live.
Oh, whatever.
Okay, we're live now. It's always Jimmy's fault. It was Jimmy's fault. He was late. Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you so much for joining. We are late because Jimmy was getting his face done and trying on his mask. But I guess given the recent events, we thought we would actually do a live chat. And we have Faye, Jimmy, Obaid, and Halima will join in a bit. I'm just going to go around and they'll introduce themselves and then we'll jump straight in. Faye, go for it.
I think people on your channel know who I am since we're mentioned quite synonymously or exchangeably. But yeah, I'm Faye. I'm back on Zara's channel and we're talking about the Black Lives Matter movement. So that's what we're doing.
Hey, I'm Obaid. I'm in Canada right now. I don't know. I just kind of pipe up about a lot of different things, and I think I got a little bit different take on this, and I want to look at this going back a little bit, looking at it from a larger sense, and try to draw some parallels from, being apostates, being ex-Muslims, and how we see things in the media. To like when it comes to issues like race and this particular instance with George Floyd, like, I mean, we can talk about how horrific it is, but I think before this happened, I think the conversation had devolved so badly that at this point we can't have a normal, proper discourse. And I think there's some larger issues around this, and that's my take on this, and that's where I'm kind of coming from this angle. Like, I don't think I'll disagree that police need reform. I don't think I'll disagree that what happened to George Floyd was horrific. I don't think I'll disagree with the slogan Black Lives Matter. I might have some issues with the organization itself, but it's not like wholesale condemnation. I think the discussion and everything has been poisoned in media and in policy and everything for the last 20 years. Now it's coming out into general population. I think in the academy, it's been at least 40 years, if not more. So, and I think there is a huge problem with that. And I think that is one of the things that's causing all the craziness right now.
Yeah, we'll definitely go into it as we move along. Jimmy.
So I'm Jimmy. I don't know if anybody knows me on your channel. I haven't got a clue. Basically, I'm Faye's gay husband. In traditional Islamic sense, I'm about 20 years older than her.
You hear that, man? He's taken.
Yeah, so I guess I'm here because I wanted to have a conversation about a couple of things. So I think there was like a bit of a ex-Muslim BLM gate thing that happened on Twitter where some ex-Muslims were like, other ex-Muslims need to talk out about this. And I think we should kind of unpick that because I think it might have fractured, so left some fracturing in our community. And I think actually we're such a dialogue-orientated community that, fine, when tensions come up, great, tensions are going to always come up, but let's sit down and have a conversation about what the tension is and see, even with our differing perspectives, find a way to reach forward. And that may be a point of no commonality. We may still be in completely different perspectives from where we are, but we can respect the fact that we actually have different perspectives on this and move forward. And then I think what I'm quite interested in talking about, although what Obaid said was really interesting, I'd be keen to hear more about that. I think what I'm really interested in talking about is that for about 5 years, I was like a hardcore social justice warrior, completely thought police brutality, systemic racism within the States and the USA and Western liberal democracies was such a component of our daily lives as ethnic minority people. And then I went through this journey of actually looking at the data around some of these claims, and not just looking at the data on a surface level, but scrutinizing that data and interrogating it to some extent. And now I find myself like outside of that, completely not an SJW anymore. And I think we need to have a conversation about police brutality because I'm of the mind that actually it's a bit of a myth, like this idea that the police are running around in America or in the UK. I think any sensible person knows it's not happening in the UK, but there are some people who are still claiming it's happening in the UK, and I just think that's absolutely absurd. But in America, even where we actually know the number of police shootings is higher, and the number of deaths in terms of interactions with the police is significantly higher, the idea that that's driven by race rather than it being driven by crime is fallacious, and I think it's quite interesting. I think about a week ago, Atheist Republic did a very similar stream to this, where they started interrogating the data as well, and their findings were consistent with what I'm saying. So you have to understand, for people like me, I wanted to land on the other side of the debate. I wanted to land on the idea that the police were targeting Black people, that the police were brutalizing Black people, because that would make me feel better, maybe as an ethnic minority person, but it also fit in my worldview at the time. But as we start looking at the data behind it, and we see that this is more about criminal activity rather than about people's race, it doesn't hold that actually Black people are being targeted or hunted down by policemen to be murdered.
And I guess for those who don't know me, I'm Zara. And yeah, just to aid to everybody's points, well, basically, we've had George Floyd's death that sparked a lot of the protests and a movement. And there has been a lot of polarized views, also a bit of a gray area for some people. But also just amongst ex-Muslims, I think where I come from, there was a lot of pressure into why are you not using your platform to talk about things? Or why are you not with us? And if you're not with us, you're against us. And I think personally, I bring in a different opinion or a different viewpoint, which is I was born and raised in a country where I was a minority with Black people being the majority. And I've never used a lot of the Black, brown labels in Tanzania as much as I had just considered myself to be Tanzanian. So I've been on the other side where, Black people are the majority and the ones in power, and have been discriminated by it, but also have recognized that racism comes from both sides. So from the minorities and the majority, and people who have power and people who don't have power. So I am going to add Halima to the conversation. Hi, Halima. We
Hi.
just started introducing ourselves. So we haven't got into any discussion, but everybody was kind of introducing themselves, talking about the situation. So I guess just up to you. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi. So nice to see all of you guys. Hi, Jimmy love.
Hey,
Hi,
baby, you
Faye.
look beautiful. I love your lipstick.
Thank you, love. Hi, Obaid.
Hey, Halima. Nice
Hi,
to-
Sarah.
Hi.
Zara and I have been in touch today, so I was like, I saw you today. My name is Halima. I do live in the Netherlands. I'm black, as you can see. The thing that I really had at the beginning, I was like, oh wow, Black Lives Matter. It's great, you know. Institutional racism, that's a thing that needs to be addressed, and this and that. But I slowly saw that it started becoming a thing for making people, generalizing people, first of all, and then also just anybody. I got cancelled. I'm black. and what I see even right now today, this is like the latest, is I also see Islamists jumping on the conversation. And when was it? Today is Friday.
Is she there? Is she
On
stuck?
Wednesday, we had a
thinking.
protest event here in Amsterdam.
she's cutting in and out.
Oh no.
Hello, are we still there?
Yeah,
You're freezing.
Halima, get Sky, man. What is with this Dutch internet?
Okay, this is actually kind of funny because when I was working in Afghanistan, the company that we were using to go back to Canada, their backhaul was in the Netherlands, and one of their technicians, whenever he was on ground, if there was a problem, his whole answer was rain, fade in Amsterdam, rain, fade in Amsterdam. I was
Obaid,
like, come on.
Did you really just compare internet in Afghanistan to internet in the Netherlands?
No, he was no, but because we went through the Netherlands, right, to get our link back to Canada.
Right.
He said, whenever there was a problem, his whole answer was because of the rain, heavy rain in the Netherlands, that was blocking the satellite signal. That's why the signal was cutting.
Sure.
So it was always a problem. So I'm just saying, rain fade in the Netherlands, it's cutting out the internet because, you know.
Yeah.
He said Amsterdam, not Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Oh,
No, but,
I heard Afghanistan.
Yeah.
No. But I was in Afghanistan, but our connection from Afghanistan to Canada went through Amsterdam. So he always said, he never looked at the equipment in Afghanistan. He always said, oh, no, it's a problem in Amsterdam because it's too rainy and too cloudy, and that's stopping the satellite signal.
But we live in the UK. Amsterdam has no excuse.
No, but Halima's in Amsterdam, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
there you go.
So Halima's not going to be here. So who wants? Well, for now, obviously. Somebody suggested, Halima, I don't know if you can hear us, that maybe if you connect with your video off, it takes less bandwidth.
It might work a little bit better, yeah.
You could then speak with just your voice, so that might be something worth doing. But I don't know if you can hear us.
I've messaged her, and I think she's joined back in. Hi, Halima.
Hi.
If it helps, maybe turn off your video or connect wired to your computer. That way you're also here with audio.
No, I changed my Wi-Fi. I have two routers, one downstairs and one upstairs. So now I changed it to the one downstairs.
Yeah, I told you guys.
I think it should be better.
She's gone on to Sky. Excellent work, just like I suggested.
And now I forgot what I was saying. I was on point with...
You were talking about Islamists hijacking the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yeah, exactly. Today, just today, that is. It's like you see all these Islamists and, you know, people who normally use the Islamophobia word jumping on this Black Lives Matter issue. And on for example, on today is Friday. On Wednesday, Amsterdam had this big event that was happening at the Belmer Arena, Belmer at the Nelson Mandela Park, which is like, it was iconic because, you know, they were respecting the 1.5 meter distance for COVID and all that. But it was quite iconic, and it was very nice in that sense. It was well organized and this and that. But they had one of the speakers, a guy who represents the Muslim community or whatever, and I was like, and in my opinion, this is a personal opinion, I was looking at the live event. It was being broadcasted in a Dutch television, and I was looking at it. I was looking at it like, he looks like one of those guys who would kill his daughters if she's dating a black man, you know.
Mm-hmm.
and so in a way, what I don't agree is the fact that it's metamorphosized into so much identity politics. Right? Of course, there are issues that need to be addressed, but it doesn't necessarily mean that these issues are as bad in the Western world. In fact, it is worse in where I come from, for example, or in the Middle East, or you know, things like that. It's I find it like it's going on a different level now. Movies are being recalled. Stand-up comedy is gonna be next.
Yeah, but okay, but the movie's being recalled, right? Just think, okay, I can think back to 2 years ago, at least in North America, with cancel Baby It's Cold Outside, because that's rape culture, right? There was also that same year in Canada, a lot of people were pushing, it started in a library in Edmonton. They said that fairy tales, because they told women that they were powerless, shouldn't be taught to little kids. So that there was a movement growing in Canada, and there were large voices who, you know, normally say they're free speech advocates, calling for this fairy tales, no more fairy tales for little kids. Okay, so this thing with taking out the movies, yes, that's now because it's so in your face, but this has been going on for, I mean, 2015 in London. It's called the Passions for Freedom Art Festival. Okay, they had a series of paintings by a Middle Eastern artist who goes under the name Mimsy because she's afraid to get afraid of violence, right? She drew this series of paintings called Mysis, and it was a series of woodland animals, and it was all kinds of woodland animals. They're teachers, there's picnics, there's barbecues, there's on the beach, there's in school, there's all kinds of things, and in the background always there's little mice dressed up like ISIS walking up. The British police and the insurance said, no, we're not going to play. The insurance said, we're not going to cover this because it's too expensive. So the British said, we can't guard this. So because of security reasons, that was pulled. And this is called the Passions for Freedom Art Festival. So this stuff is not new. This stuff has been around for a while. It's being pushed for, like I said, this has been pushed in the media and through policy for 20 years, like at least since 1998. This has been in the academy, like, and I'm talking about things like intersectionality and critical race theory. And before that, you can talk about postmodernism, but intersectionality and critical race theory have been taught in the academy since the early 90s. Critical race theory, Derek Bell wrote the paper in 76. You know, the first paper Crenshaw wrote about that was 89. So I think there's that problem. When you talk about, they're canceling movies now. Yeah, that's now, and they're going crazy, but they've been doing this for a while. Like Charlie Hebdo getting firebombed, Salman Rushdie. Like, there have been warning bells, and people have been saying this for a while, and no one's been listening, and we've been called crazy.
Okay, so if I can just comment on everything that everyone has said, I do want to give a couple of disclaimers. Is that I do not know why I've become the spokesperson for BLM within the ex-Muslim community. And
no, I think there is a reason why that's happening.
And I do. Hold on. Hold on.
Calling out people who weren't.
Hold on.
That's why it's happened.
Okay, I'll try moderating.
It's of your own making.
I get that. But at the same time, at the same time, I've not been discouraging the other side. Actually, within those videos, I have said, I don't care what your opinion is, just say it. And I feel like there's been a lot of skipping around the issue or two-timing and double-teaming and not really coming out with what you actually believe. And that's what's been bothering me.
And why do you think that might be, though? Why do you think people might be being hesitant about this issue to come forward?
Let me moderate this.
Okay, you guys had like, it's been 17 minutes. I said 2 sentences. Can I please speak? Okay?
Okay. I'll moderate this. Faye, you talk, and then I'll pass it along.
So, in terms of what Obaid said about not being able to have normal and proper discussions, as someone who holds a lot of libertarian ideals, I do believe in having normal and proper discussions. I do believe in people holding opposite opinions and having the ability to talk about them, because I think that's the only way we can reach conclusions that are valuable, and we're able to talk about these things and, you know, reach a conclusion that actually makes sense for everybody. And it's one of the reasons why, even though a lot of people have told me, no, you should back out of this, there's 4 people who are going to be going against you and it's just going to be you saying the same thing over and over again. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to come here and do this. Jimmy, you told me that it's always been easy to disagree with me, and that's because I'm the oldest in an Indian family and I've always been disagreed with my whole life. So it's easy for me because I understand disagreement and understand coming from another place. And I also want to say that I'm not the most educated on like sociological identity politics and things like that. I know some social psychology, I understand riots and riot dynamics and ideologies, but I'm not the most grounded in identity politics, because I believe that at some point you have to just accept your lot in life, and you get what you get, and you have to just deal with it sometimes. But at the same time, I do think that, well, Jimmy also said that we're a dialogue-oriented community, right? And I do agree with that. We are a dialogue-oriented community. So when I saw the lack of dialogue, it bothered me, and it made me angry. And in terms of, like, I've noted down quite a few things. So in terms of systemic racism, I do think that there is a case to be made for it. I think that it's difficult to argue against it. Again, don't know too much about identity politics, but in America, there definitely is a problem with police brutality, with the education system, with healthcare, and how the data is drawn in terms of minorities and white people. In terms of the UK, there are some instances of that, certainly not with police brutality, but there are some cases with miscarriages of justice, with education, with some NHS stuff, to the point where the NHS has had to launch investigations into, for example, maternity deaths, or I've forgotten what they're called, deaths at childbirth and things like that. And in terms of Zara, I think that there were a lot of hyperbolizations of what happened online, with you being bullied and being called a white supremacist and being called a racist, when really we were just disagreeing with you.
I have no idea where that came. I haven't even read any of that.
I'm sorry, but I have seen tweets from you that suggest that. So
that suggests that I'm a white supremacist, or
no,
that I was called?
That suggests that you feel like you've been called a white supremacist.
Oh, okay.
When for the most part your audience was agreeing with you, and there were maybe 4 people disagreeing with you. There's also this constant reassertion.
Can we stay away from personal critiques of individual people, because I think that could get quite messy, saying
I was going to
this,
say
Zara that, Obaid this.
Let's
just stay away from personal stuff.
I was just, I guess I thought I'd just make this clear, because somebody said Faye's being trumped. I don't think this is the case, because I can hands down say that there are things Halima and I will disagree on, Jimmy and I, Obaid and I, and things that Faye and I will agree on. And that will be the case with many people. And that the idea of this is not to label anyone, it's not to call out on the tweets, but rather agree, or rather talking about the ideas that the tweets represented, no matter who it came from, where it comes from, and what it looks like.
Sure.
So if we stick to ideas, I think that will be better. But personally, I don't care what people think about me. I have my own experiences that have suggested otherwise. But I guess to start with, we'll start with the first point of the tweet and how this all started. And this is not to blame anyone or call them out, but it's mostly that what started off was a lot of ex-Muslims were told to put their opinions out there about, I guess, the BLM movement. And my reasons for that was that I feel that the BLM movement had taken things a step further, especially with rioting, with vandalism, no matter who it was. And then from my point of view, what I had seen was it wasn't the Black people causing the rioting. It wasn't Black people actually doing the graffiti. It was actually white people who had done it. And a lot of them were the Antifa people, and there were suggested groups, there were t-shirts, and there were people that did suggest that Antifa had done this. And from my point of view, given that I do have a lot of American friends, I have always known that they're like, I can't put my opinion out there because I'm white. And there were other friends of mine who were left-leaning, like myself. And when I talked to them about it, they're like, yeah, but, you know, I have all this privilege and whatnot. And I'm like, hands down, I can say that I have had more privilege than a lot of my white friends. And I don't understand why they were born with it, thinking it. And a lot of kids who are like, if you're born in a white family, you have privilege. And I completely disagree with that. And I feel like a lot of this is in the America, specifically because we don't have this in Australia, white guilt. There was a lot of white guilt happening where that energy was then used to motivate the far left group, which is also known as one of the terrorist group by the US and some organization, the Antifa group, which I think there was a part of the BLM members who were part of the protest and left-leaning and vandalizing. And my dissent is peaceful protests is all like, I am against corporal punishment. I'm against any punishment that involves torture, death. So why would I not be against even a movement that causes violence, harm, and basically sets precedents that this is how we want changes without actually putting the demands forward? Some of the people that I did talk to who were in the protest in the US had no idea what the demands were. They just wanted to support the people, which is great. Okay, then I guess my dissent to this is it okay for us to throw the statue in the water because, you know, it was according to them, it was glorifying somebody who was a slave owner and a slave trader, but it's also illegal to vandalize. I would rather, it's why we have petitions. It's why we have petitions. It's why we have changes. And I'll pass this on to you, Faye, and then we'll go on. So we'll go in the circle that we have.
My original, so within ideologies that involve rioting and with revolutions and things like that, I've made a video clarifying the ideologies that exist. So there's a radical ideology and there's a conservative ideology. I don't quite understand why you would focus simply on the rioting and the violence when that is not the majority of the movement and what the movement is putting out. They're clearly not endorsing the rioting and the violence. And on the other side of the coin, I don't know why also you wouldn't be sharing the petitions and the fundraisers and things like that when those are peaceful forms of protest, but instead just focus on the rioting and the vandalism, which is an extremely conservative stance to take when looking at rioting and looking at revolution.
Can I say something? I think that you know, the petitions and all the good stuff that's happening, that's something that is absolutely wonderful to support. However, I have seen the Black Lives Movement itself metamorphosize within hours. Within hours, things changing from rioting to also, you know, Black supremacy, and these are things that I personally was waiting and you know how it's gonna like pan out. Of course, I wrote an opinion piece which I submitted to a Dutch publication. They had issues with But I wrote an opinion piece where I thought that I would at the same time highlight systemic racism, prejudices, this kind of stuff that I have personally experienced as a Black person. But at the same time, what I didn't like was this how the metamorphosis has become, that it become a cancel culture. There's a lot of generalization. There's a hate towards white people as well. Personally, when I make it really personal, I don't like it to see placards saying white people should be killed, or white people are this, or I personally don't support that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I am speaking in the terms of, let's say what was her name? I forgot her name. This Trump supporter, Black
Candace Owens.
Candace Owens.
Candace. And not necessarily. You see, it's not about the politics. It's more about the nuance. I like a discussion that is nuanced. I like a discussion that can address the issues and not necessarily generalize, not go into these extreme, if you don't say something, then you're racist. I don't like that. I personally don't like that.
Okay, so there are a couple of things that still I have to address from Zara, but I mean, go ahead. I'll take notes.
Okay, I just want to say one thing here, right? Like, I know we're here or whatever. I'm not here because of those tweets. I couldn't give a rat's ass about those tweets, frankly. Like, to be honest, I'm here because I think there's a bigger issue, and we're here. Those tweets, fine, got us here.
Sure.
Who gives it? I mean, honestly, they don't matter in this thing. They don't matter. And like, can we all agree that we shouldn't say you should speak out about this and why don't you speak out about that? It doesn't matter. There's a much bigger issue here, and that's okay. So Black Lives Matter. You're saying it morphed in a matter of hours. No, it didn't. Black Lives Matter started in 2013. Linda Sarsour has been the darling of the left, and you're talking about the Islamists just now took it over. No, and I hate the term Islamist, but I don't want to get into that. But Muslim theocrats have been using, I shouldn't say using. I don't want to say they're the whites are using it, but they've been using that language because that language is so easy to be gained. The language of critical race theory, the language of intersectionality makes it so easy to gain. Black Lives Matter, from its inception, has been used by people like Linda Sarsour. So it's there. It's being used by organizations like CARE. Now, another thing with this is, I mean, Black Lives Matter. It's not. There is one kind of overarching organization, but there are a bunch of separate organizations. Like, is not one organization. It's all a bunch of different little cells. Black Lives Matter. They're more cohesive. They have more what they each other do. There's more of an organization thing. But again, Black Lives Matter. I started seeing it in about 2015. They were asking for segregated dorm rooms. They were asking, or in 2016, they were asking for segregated graduation ceremonies. I'm sorry, but that's not equality. That's not helping fight racism. There was a video from a girl in University of Virginia. It was earlier this year. I don't know if she's part of Black Lives Matter. I have no idea. But she was in the University of Virginia. She went to a public space. It's a common space in the university. One of her friends filmed it. They uploaded it, I guess, thinking she was doing a great thing, saying, I want all the white people to leave because this is now a black space. Okay. So Black Lives Matter has some of those issues. Okay. The little autonomous zone they created in Seattle, one of their demands is for segregation. Okay. They complain about stop and frisk, which is wrong. But then they set up a thing where they said, anyone who we don't know that looks funny, we'll stop them and ask them what they're doing here. That's stop and frisk. All right. Again, like some of this stuff, critical race theory, right? You were talking about, Halima, you're black. Okay. And Faye, this is the only thing I'll say about your video, because honestly, like I said, I think this is much bigger, but you use the terms blackness, right? Blackness comes from critical race theory. Now, don't believe what I'm saying. I'll give you a list of books. I'll give you resources. Read them. And if you think I'm making this all up, tell me, okay? But this is coming straight from it. If you don't have the American black experience, you are not black in America. So a Nigerian immigrant who's been there for 10 years, their kids were 7 or 8 years old, they go through high school. They've faced racism in high school. They faced whatever systemic racism you say is in the United States. They've gone through it. They're now in college. No, you don't have a black experience. They've been stopped by police just like their friends. They've had all that stuff happen to them. No, you don't have blackness. When Joe Biden said, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black. Okay. And the Pulitzer Prize winner, she just won it for revisionist history, but whatever. I don't even want to get into that. Hannah Nicole Jones, she tweeted out, there's a difference between being black and there's a difference between being politically black. So they're defining so critical race theory defines what is black. So when Black Lives Matter and different organizations...
Exactly, being black...
Sorry,
go ahead. Being black in identity and being politically black, those are two different things in the Western world. And I'm very new to the Western world, but I'm learning that.
But I don't think it should
black,
be. No, but it shouldn't be. There shouldn't be.
And being black on the political spectrum of identity.
But
those are two different things.
Yeah, but there shouldn't be being black politically, right? Kanye puts on a MAGA hat and he's no longer black. Okay, Trevor Phillips in the UK speaks out against the grooming gangs, and he's the coconut. Like, okay, Ben Carson, I think he's an idiot, but whatever, Oh, well, he ran for the Republicans. He's no longer black. Obama was, one of his parents was white. Obama's half black. Like, come on. This idea of politically black or politically Pakistani or politically this. My friend Faisal Al-Mutar, okay, I think you all know who he is. He was giving a talk in Rochester, and he was talking about, he grew up in Iraq under Saddam. He was talking about, things that are, and they're like, you're the wrong kind of Arab. What the hell does that mean? And this is coming from critical race theory. This is coming from post-colonialism. This is what I'm saying is despoil the discourse. So no, I don't support Black Lives Matter as an organization. I support the thing for let's get rid of police brutality. Let's look at the problems with the policing. Yes, there's problems in education, but it's not due to racism. Yes, there's problems. There's a lot of these problems, and Black Lives Matter is making it a univariant thing, and they have a lot of issues with the way they talk, and so I can't support them. I can support certain issues, but not as an organization as a whole, not when they have that stuff attached to them. And I can get into a lot of stuff with critical race theory that is racist as all hell.
Just before Jimmy goes next, I think the one problem that I have is this group thinking that if you're not with us, you're against us. And I think that just limits any discourse. It just limits, my way is right, your way isn't, or that I don't think your way is right. And that doesn't give fairness to other people to have separate opinions. And
can I just say one quick thing? I want to apologize because I know I get a little excited, and I'm not upset at anyone here. I don't hold any animosity towards I'm upset at the situation. So if my voice gets raised, you can tell me to calm down. I'm sorry. I apologize very much.
I love it. I love it. I love the passion. But Jimmy, you had a few points, and I was just waiting to give you the mic. So Jimmy, go for it.
I mean, I've been very patient, so I appreciate it if you could give me a bit of time, on this. So I just want to talk about the data, yeah? So I want to move away from this idea of systemic racism in wider society. We can all agree that kind of everything kicked off because of what happened with George Floyd, yeah? So there was that incident with George Floyd, everything kicked off. That was what came out of that was actually police brutality, and the police are racist against Black people in America. And then the wider issue of that is seen as, but this is a facet of systemic racism within America. Yeah. So I just want to narrow it down to police brutality and explore that aspect of the conversation. And then if we want to take it wider than that, let's go wider than that. Yeah. But in terms of what we have to agree as a starting point in this is that discrepancy does not equal discrimination. It's so important that everybody understands that, because when I was in the social justice warrior world, I didn't know that was true, that if the data shows a discrepancy between two groups, I always thought that it meant discrimination.
Yeah. Correlation doesn't equal causation,
No, that's a different,
That's a different one.
There's a difference, that's something completely different.
Okay.
So let me give you an example of discrepancy not equaling discrimination. I'm going to make up some data for you to show this, yeah? So, for example, if you did a research paper on ethnicity with prosecutions around honor crime, and you found that 90% of honor crime prosecutions were to do with South Asian men, and only 10% of them were to do with, 5% of them were to do with Chinese men, and 5% of them to do with white men, somebody could claim, well, look, actually, there's racism in this system because you're prosecuting South Asian men for honor crimes at 90%, and they only constitute 10% of the population, and actually 80% of your population is white. Why aren't you this disproportionate thing? It must be systemic racism. Yeah. So we can
But
see
isn't that because some of those crimes can be in a way predominant in a certain
ethnicity.
race,
Yes.
ethnicity.
Yeah,
I mean,
completely.
for crimes like FGM, for crimes like honor violence, I mean, those are cultural, religious, or whatever it is, that are predominantly in that demographic.
Perfect. So if we all hold what Salima just said as the key component of that, actually, it's not discrimination. It's just that some groups are overrepresented in honor violence, and honor crime. Similarly, if we look at violent crime, actually, if we look at murder, for example, again, I'm going to make up these statistics, but if you took and looked at the data, they would corroborate the sense that I'm going to give you, is that actually violent crime is overwhelmingly a male phenomena. So you might find 90% of murder prosecutions are done against men and 10% are done against women. And then what you would say is actually the system is systemically sexist against men because actually they only make up 50% of the population, but you're prosecuting them 90% of the time. But just like how Halima said, actually, it's nothing to do with any bias or anything like that. It's that this group actually are overrepresentative. So men are overrepresented within violent crime. Yeah. So we just need to hold on to that, because any data study that you show that tends to come from the social justice or leftists, which says things like black men are 8 times as likely to be shot as, well, I think it's 2 times as likely to be shot as a white person. That reads to us as human beings as injustice immediately. Yeah, we think, oh my God, this must be systemic racism because black people only constitute 13% of the population and white people constitute about 50% of the population in the States.
Sure.
But if we hold the same idea about actually what we're looking at is criminality, any data without the component on criminality doesn't give you accurate information, and it makes it look like discrimination. So the data I'm about to give you now is drawn from a YouTube video called Intelligence Squared. I recommend everybody watch it, and it's about race, police and racial bias in the States.
It would be good to put that in the description, actually.
In the States or in the UK, Jimmy?
It's in the
for
US.
The States. So
How
US.
long is the
I
video?
don't think any. It's
a couple hours.
It's a 2-hour long video. But anybody who wants to lean into this conversation should listen to that video. Intelligence Squared do debates. They get 2 people for the motion, 2 people against the motion.
Can I recommend?
No, you cannot. You
I'm just going to recommend another video. I'll let you go. I'll let you go after this other video. It's on the same topic. It's John McWhorter, and I forget who's.
This is not moderating, Sava. I'm just letting you know.
No, but John McWhorter is talking. I forget who he's talking with. It's a debate on anti-racism, and McWhorter in his opening statement brings up all these facts. So they talk about systemic racism and the anti-racism movement based off of CRT. So if you want to watch a couple of videos, and Zara, I'll send you a bunch of links if you want to update.
I was just going to say, while you guys are talking, and then while the other person's talking, just send me the video links, and I'll start putting them on.
Yeah, sure.
So I just want to go back to somebody's posted in the group. Mystery Zen, this kiss is for you. I know we disagree on everything. We don't even know each other, but we disagree on everything. But thank you for pointing out the points you're pointing out. It's really important that you're here exposing yourself to different ideas, but also exposing us to your perspective on things as well. So Mystery Zone has said that sex isn't race, and that's not an accurate comparison. But actually, when we look at crime statistics, we break them down by things like ethnicity, we break them down by age, we break them down by sex, we break them down by gender, all of that sort of stuff. So whilst you might say that's not a contextual, it's completely contextual, Mystery Zen. Like just look at the way that data's broken down. Look at our Equality Act, you'll see that actually it has these same components within it, which are protected characteristics.
I did clarify that you were giving an example of statistical discrepancy.
Okay. Cool. So like I said, I don't like to take credit for other people's work, right? So the data I'm going to give you is from a lady called Heather McDonald. She's really, really well versed in this, and in addition to that, if you want to look for somebody, but she's white, right? And I know for some people that's going to be a problem. So if you want somebody who's black, there's a gentleman called Brandon Tatum, or Tantum, however you say it. He's a black former police officer, and he also will give you the same sort of data and information. You can find him all over YouTube as well. Both of these people are conservative, but I think when we look at the data, your political affiliation falls away. That's one of the beautiful things, that actually, when you look at numbers, your affiliation falls away from it. So I'm just going to talk about policing really quickly and give you the data for 2015. So policing isn't based on race. Policemen don't sit around waiting for opportunities to go out and get black people or Chinese people or white people. Policing is data driven. So where the police go to is based on the data and the information that they receive. And because in minority neighborhoods, that's where most of the crime is, police have to go there. So how is that crime reported to the police? It's people who are ethnic minorities picking up the phone and saying, there's been a shooting in my neighborhood, there's been a robbery in my neighborhood, I got mugged in my neighborhood. And then the police go to those areas where they're being called into. Yeah, that's how policing is done in the States. So we're going to look at violent crime, because with violent crime, you can almost guarantee that it's reported. Yeah, people don't have a homicide in their back garden and then not call the police because there's a body there, it gets reported, as opposed to other forms of crime which might not get reported, right? But in 2015, there were 991 people killed by the police. 50% of those were white, yeah? And within that 50% of people that were white, there are some instances of people who are unarmed. So for example, there was a 50-year-old man who charged the policeman with a fucking spoon. Sorry, didn't mean to swear. He charged the policeman with a spoon and he was killed because they thought it was
Zara's
a weapon.
channel. It's not intelligent squared.
So he charged the policeman with a spoon, right? And he got shot and killed because he charged the policeman with a spoon because they thought that they were being attacked. But you have to ask the question as to how comes none of us heard about that? That a policeman shoots somebody charging him with a spoon, but because the victim was white and it doesn't suit this narrative of police are after black people, it didn't blow up in the same way that other police shootings have done, yeah? So of those 991 people who were all overwhelmingly armed that were killed, 50% were white. 26% of those fatal shootings were black. So as I said, this sounds like it's double the percentage of people, like double the percentage of the black population, which is 13%, who are then killed by the police. And if you just look at those numbers, it looks like it is actually an issue. Yeah?
I love
give me a moment to get the rest of the data.
I love data as well. And in some instances, I will look at the data more than I will look at the debate. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that there are no
nuances.
Especially in America, that the police are.
Halima, let me finish this because we started a data thread. So I just want to finish the data thread and I'll hand it back over to you. So what I'm saying is it looks like the black community are shot double the rate of what they actually constitute as a population, right?
Sure.
But then when we look at violent crime in America and we see that 13% of the population, which are black, constitute 50% of violent crime. Guys, you have to get your head around that.
America has the system of the Jim Crow where...
okay, Halima, I'm sorry.
You have to let me finish my numbers.
Let Jimmy finish.
You have to let me finish. I was so patient. I didn't interrupt anybody. Just let me finish.
Let Jimmy finish.
And I'll hand it to you. So what I'm saying is that 13% of the population, which are black, are constituting 50% of violent crime. Sure. That is absolutely huge. Yeah, it's completely disproportionate. And I think we have to generate, well, I don't know if we've got a consensus here. So what I'm saying to you is actually, if a policeman has somebody else with a gun pointing at him, I believe that that policeman has the right to shoot and defend himself. I really do. If it's the policeman who's policing the community, somebody else who's there, who's a criminal, has got a gun pointing at the policeman, then actually he is allowed to shoot that person to defend himself or the other people who might be around him.
Just a short interjection. Can we leave questions for the end? Because I think that might make the conversation more messy if we...
Yeah, you're right. So what I'm saying is that actually there's a huge, overwhelming overrepresentation of Black people in violent crime.
Sure.
And that leads then to an increase in police interactions with Black people because Black victims pick up the phone and they call the police. So remember who's calling the police. It's not nobody's calling the police, they just miraculously appear. You've got minority communities picking up the phone, calling the police and saying there's a shooting going on, there's some violent crime going on, please come down to our community, please come and help us. Then these policemen come into the community, they might be white, Chinese, Black, whatever they are, and then a shootout takes place. And because of that shootout, a Black person dies. But because of the overrepresentation in violent crime, it means that virtually every time they get called out, the police are going to be interacting with another person who is of color. Yeah, that is not racism. That's following policing and crime. And I just want to break it down to one individual state, because when you hear these numbers, they're mind blowing. So again, in 2015, just in New York, of all the shootings, there were 75% of all shootings were done by Black people, who make up 23% of the population in New York. Now, when I give you these numbers, they're not even, it's even worse than that, because we know that violent crime is mainly a male phenomenon. So when I say to you 23% of the population are Black in New York, it's not the women who are running out doing those shootings. So you're looking at more like 12.5%, which would be the Black males doing the 75% of those shootings in New York. Guys, these statistics are so painful to say out loud, because they're exactly like when we talk about honor violence, it's always Muslim people, you know, like it's overwhelmingly, it's always Muslim people. It's such a painful data set to look at, but that doesn't mean we can hide from it or pretend it's not true. Yeah. So again, within New York, of all of the shootings in the same years, whites did 2% of those shootings. And they make up 34% of that population. So again, that means if you're New York, if you're NYPD, every time you get a phone call, it's going to be from a minority community person calling you up to say there's a shooting in my area, and your police are going to go out and they're going to be interacting with a Black person. Because if you look at that discrepancy between 75% and 2%, it's mind-blowing.
I am going to pull this back to Halima, and then we're going to take a circle again.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
The point I wanted to make is about the nuance per country, right? Like, for example, in the US, the system in the US, it has a lot of problems, right? The system in the US has always laws that do date back to the Jim Crow time, right? So the US has peculiar problems that we can look at it that way. Police brutality could have been a cultural thing that it's developed over the years and it's been accepted and whatever. And I do agree with Jimmy about the statistics of problematic neighborhoods and this and that. But that, when you look at the bigger picture, that can also come from the fact that there's a lot of segregation, there's a lot of social problems, there's a lot of that kind of problem that stems from that. I'm not excusing crime, but crime does come from large majority of those neighborhoods on Black to Black lives. There's a lot of gang memberships and this and that, and in America, that's a big problem. However, where I want to find the nuance, for example, is when the thing becomes like all police are bad to Black people and all white people are bad to Black people. That I find problematic, not because I want to cancel anybody, but because you have to nuance it, the conversation to a country, right? You have to look at the systems that are in place in each country. I live in the Netherlands. The Netherlands has its problems. It has its problems of prejudices and this and that, but that doesn't necessarily mean police in the Netherlands shoot Black people. No, it's not the same. It's not the same as the US, and that's a fact.
Okay, I want to address. I need to address this because I'm sorry. I've lived in Canada my whole life, and I know it's not the U.S., but we get American news. We get inundated with American everything. Now I'm going to address some of these things. That Jim Crow ended in 1950. Yes, there is the what goes forward from it. Brown v. Board of Education was 1954, I believe, or maybe it was I forget but it was in the mid 1950s. The Civil Rights Act was 1964. I'm not saying that the minute these things were passed, everything changed. Okay, but and this comes to my larger point about how the media has screwed us over. Okay, and this is not fake news. This is not any of this stuff. This is media and policy, and this is coming straight out of critical race theory. And I think this is really important right now. By the late 1980s, okay, everything was. I mean, I shouldn't say it was perfect, but we'd gotten to the point where we could say, you know what? Things like redlining. Look up redlining when they lowered tunnels or overpasses, so bridges couldn't go, so black communities couldn't get to the beach. Things like that. It was manipulating communities through community design or city design or whatever. Right? It was horrible, and I don't agree. That's systemic racism. But these things were being addressed. These things were being fixed. Things had gotten so much better. Okay. And then I used 1998 as a starting point because if you look at when critical race theory and intersectionality and all that really got into school and really started getting going in universities was around the early 90s. Right? By the time you had people with masters and stuff graduate was the late 90s, early 2000s, masters and doctorate levels. Again, like I said, things had gotten so good. Clinton era was just ending. And then you can talk about Biden's crime thing. We can talk about why there's more policing in black neighborhoods because the black neighborhoods demanded it, first of all, in the late 80s, early 90s, but whatever.
Exactly.
Leave that aside for a second. But things were getting so much better. But by the time, this is why I talk about journalism and policy and why we're at the thing we are now. So these people with masters and PhDs get into either interns or junior level positions in management. By the time Obama comes around, these people have hired more who think just like them, who've thought in critical race theory, who think in those terms, right? Where everything is racism. By 2008, if you look at Washington Post, LA Times, New York Post, NPR, by 2008, the number of times they have articles on racism, white supremacy, it doubles. By 2015, it more than triples. Okay, they're painting this certain picture. Okay, if they had spent all that time talking about police brutality, you might have more white people say, you know what, there's a problem with the police, instead of just saying, no, police are racist. Saying that Jim Crow is still causing systemic racism, I think is a problem. It's when this stuff started coming out, you had 20 years of media and policy based on how the United States is an insanely racist country. And they included Canada in this as well, which is like just ludicrous. Okay. And it painted this picture. So when kids started reading this stuff, when you read it in the media, you're told over and over again. And I use this as a tweet. It's a cliche example, but that African saying, the village that doesn't embrace a child will burn down in the fire that he lights to warm himself. Right? For 20 years, the village has been telling kids that no one loves you, or they've been telling other kids, you're the reason that no one loves those kids. You caused it because of the color of your skin. Yeah. And that is a huge problem. So when you bring up these things in the United States, okay, no, it's not because of Jim Crow, which ended in the 1950s. And yes, there was things that carried over, but they were being addressed and they were being fixed. And then we turned to this shit to fix racism. And it got so much worse. And it keeps getting worse because they put this shit out. Again, when we look at something about Islam in the newspapers, and we're like, what are you talking about? That's not Islamophobia. That's not racism against Muslims, blah, blah, all that. When people like John McWhorter and Coleman Hughes and Glenn Lowry and Kamele and Thomas Chatterton Williams and Cornel West and whatever start talking about how it's not systemic racism, how there's these problems of poverty, how there's these problems of gangs, how those communities they're called the same things we are. Oh, you were never really Muslim. Oh, they're not really black. They don't have blackness. They're not politically black, right? It's the same parallels. So if we can see it in Islam, why can't we see it in race?
Yeah. And can I just say?
Okay.
Can I say there was one ex-Muslim tweeted out about a UK black conservative, took her tweet and sent it and quoted it and said, yeah, we all know you love sucking white dick, blah, 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 blah. Because she was a black conservative and she was saying, actually, systemic racism is a myth. We don't have police brutality, etc., etc. And you have to realize how much that is similar to when we speak out about Islam, how much they'll say to people like Faye and Zara and Halima, yeah, you just love sucking white dick. Do you know what I mean? They'll literally say that same shit. And when ex-Muslims are going after black conservatives like Candice Owen or Brandon Tantum or the UK equivalent, I'm like, you're literally saying the same stuff. And the reason they're saying it is because the stick that the black conservatives are getting is because they're dissenters. They make up a minority in the community. They're dissent. Well, I don't know if they make a minority up, but they certainly are making up a vocal minority, right? So we don't know how many black conservatives there are. They might just not be speaking up because of the way they get treated. In the same way, we know there's more ex-Muslims than those who speak up, but we know how ex-Muslims publicly get treated, so they don't come out, right? I find it phenomenal when ex-Muslims are giving black conservatives like abuse because they're enunciating a different perspective. And I just want to say one more thing, and then I'll hand over to Zara. One more statistic for you, just so that you can get your head around this ridiculous idea that police brutality is actually a thing. In 2019, so if we can accept the argument that if you're running around with a gun in a police interaction with a policeman, whether you're white, black, Chinese, whatever, actually, if you've got a gun and the policeman's got a gun, I feel like the policeman's got a right to defend himself if you're not putting down your gun, right? But for unarmed people, this is where the quandary comes up. So how prolific is it in 2019? How many black people who were shot unarmed by the police in 2019? And the number in USA is 9 people. In the whole of 2019, 9 black people were shot unarmed. They make up 44 million black people in the United States. I don't even know what that is as a percentage. And let's say of those, don't assume that unarmed means that it's not okay to shoot them. They might have still been threatening the police, like that person who was charging the police with a spoon, the white man. We've got to be understanding that the police have to make split-second decisions. If someone's charging them with something that looks like a knife, yeah, they'll shoot. And I feel like the police have got a right to defend themselves, particularly when they're called into minority communities in instances where they think violence is happening. So if 9 people who were unarmed got shot in 2019, and there's 44 million black people, that's not police brutality. That doesn't mean police are sitting down, running around, shooting unarmed black people, trying to kill unarmed black people.
Is it safe for me to talk?
I'll go next, and then Faye will go, and we're skipping Obaid in Jimmy for a bit, and then Halima, and then we'll go back around. I guess I just wanted to add to Halima's point, and boys, you're not allowed to interrupt. I've given you time. Just to address Halima's point in terms of like how it is different for different countries, and that is very much applicable. I think my distaste for this was that we have the protests for George Floyd, which it started from, going all around the world. Great, but everybody is addressing one country. They're only talking about the US and not actually encountering it in different areas. So in Australia, that is very, very, very reduced. So people who are fighting for Black Lives Matter, great. I know. I'm all for people not being hurt or not having not being at a disadvantage because of their color. But at the same time, you have the indigenous in Australia who are not getting that attention because you're not focusing on your issues in your country. Saudi Arabia, African countries too. Now, I come from an African country where I was a minority, and what you would say is systematic racism has happened to me then, because Black people were not in power. But then the idea that I don't like is that a lot of people who were in the US will start blaming white people for it. Or they say that reverse racism does not exist. But given we're all from South Asian backgrounds, except for Halima, we all know that racism does exist, that we South Asians are also racist, whether or not we're in power. I have it. So if the Merriam-Webster changing their definition to include power in their systematic power or institutionalized power in their definition for racism, that means that in Tanzania, specifically where Black people are not a minority, that means other people against them cannot be racist, and that's completely wrong. That is completely wrong, because then we're disregarding people's experiences, but trauma, but also, and I know Jimmy's based on the numbers, and I agree, racism does exist, and it exists on different scales from different people. It comes from all around. And I think the biggest problem I had with the movement, regardless of what group it was, is that the idea of reverse racism, that it doesn't exist, or that their movement was not about attacking one specific race, that kids were not out there attacking one specific race, or that kids, like, kids were told in a lot of the tweets that went out, they're like, oh, you think white people don't have those boards that say black people are bad or black people shouldn't be allowed this? But if you look at countries like the US specifically, there isn't one service or system that black people specifically are not allowed to get into. They have the opportunity to do it. And there are countries like Malaysia where if you're not Malay, you can't own a business, or you can't have certain rights. And like in China, these are institutionalized racism, because that's specifically to their race. It's not even somebody not being a citizen. I mean, for a lot of times, if, like, in South Africa now, if people come from overseas to work and have a residency permit, they're less likely to get a job, because the government has put in, I guess, more taxes, or they put in more barriers. And I'm not saying US doesn't have a racism problem. Every country does have a problem. And maybe in the US, because they're race obsessed more than other countries, it's a larger problem. But George Floyd's death, it is murder. It is definitely inexcusable for what happened to him. I don't think it was racist driven. I don't think it had to do with his color more than it had to do specifically maybe with that cop, or it could have been, everybody else, or the cop being under pressure because he had other accounts of being brutally attacking people. But I don't think that is racism, and I don't think that that is sparking and I think that is sparking a lot of anti-white racism now.
Yeah.
And that's why, for me, I feel like I am still able to say it as a woman of color, but somebody who's white cannot necessarily say it without being slandered. A lot of my friends will inbox me and talk to me about it, and I'm like, you have a point, and the facts and the data, like Jimmy said, I agree with you, but if you say it, you'll be cancelled, whereas if I say it, I will be shunned, I'll be called a white supremacist, and, having a white boyfriend, they're like, oh, you're just pleasing to the white. But those are just smears, and that doesn't matter, because like Jimmy, when I looked at the data and when I looked at how it's different in the UK, the racism is mostly towards Asian people than it is towards black people. A lot of the slurs that you have here is mostly towards Pakistani people than it is towards black people. So I guess that was my point about how it's so different in different countries that we're forgetting the bigger context of like why the movement, not the Black Lives Movement in general, but anti-racism should exist, because now we're just pointing it towards one specific race, and we're just victimizing one specific race and not actually addressing the bigger problem that exists within, I guess, our atmosphere, our environment. Faye is going next.
So
for anybody to
I have
Faye's going next.
a whole page of things to address, so please allow me some time. So the first thing, and this was from like 2 rounds ago because I didn't get to address it at all. So I think Halima said that Islamists are hijacking the movement. And there are other people who have their claws in this movement, and they're essentially detracting from the movement. Now, what I will say to that is that with every movement, there are going to be opportunists who derail the conversation for their own benefit. And I don't think that it's fair to focus on them for doing that. For example, within the ex-Muslim movement, we have ex-Muslims or people who claim to be ex-Muslims that will be bigoted towards Muslims. We don't include them as representing us because they are detracting from our movement. And I don't think it's fair for the whole anti-racism, Black Lives Matter movement, whatever you want to call it, to be focused on detractors and opportunists. The second thing that Halima said in the introduction was that it's worse elsewhere, and it's worse. There are worse things happening in other parts of the world. That's not to say that you can't fight for different things at the same time. I don't think it's fair just to say that it's worse for, like, racism, for example, is worse in Saudi Arabia, that we can't talk about racism in the US. I think it's pretty uncanny that, especially in the South, there is this sense of racism that exists. And to an extent, I do think that all of us inherently will have prejudices, and there's very little we can do about that on an individual level. But I think it's really, really imperative to address something that may exist in the system. And I'll get to that as we move on. As to, like, books, movies, and things like that being recalled, I don't think that's fair. I think that those things should exist. Like, as someone who, you know, is literary and I enjoy literature, I think it's a reflection of a time, and that should remain. To what Zara said about white privilege and that you don't think white privilege is a thing, it is a thing, and I don't think you fully understand what white privilege is. When we talk about white privilege, we're not comparing a white person and a black person from two different social groups. We're talking about privilege that exists within the same social group and within the same circumstances. So, for example, if you have a white homeless person and a black homeless person, there is a likeliness that white people will be treated differently. Again, I do want to reiterate that I'm not an expert on race issues or identity politics, because it's just not a brilliant use of my time. But I do want to say that there does exist instances of white privilege within the same social category, which is how it's meant to be used. Now, I do understand that those terms are used in order to disparage people, to silence people, and I do not disagree with that. And I do understand that there are certain people within the Black Lives Matter movement who are sort of suppressing white people and getting them to kneel and wash their feet and all kinds of crazy stuff. But that does not mean that that idea or the existence of white privilege is not there. It definitely is, in terms of like people have been having this conversation for a long time in terms of like interviews and job searching. There's actually a stat that I looked at that there is actually white criminals are more likely to be hired than black people who don't have a record at all. And I wrote that down somewhere, but I have so many stats at this point, my mind is just spinning. But I mean, I'm happy to send all of that afterwards.
I'd like to see that one particular one that you just cited.
I'll send it to you if you give me a second to find it, actually.
So no, WhatsApp it me afterwards, don't worry.
Okay,
Whenever,
all right.
take your time.
To move on to, so I addressed detractions from the thing. The nuance discussion, I do agree that we should be able to have this discussion, and it's a shame that that people are being silenced, and I don't like that. I too have white friends that I've been having this discussion with, and they feel like they're being silenced because they feel as though they can't have a voice in this. And I feel like everyone should. I think that disagreement is healthy. I think that disagreement is good. It's what makes the world go round, and that's how we come to conclusions. In terms of segregation, I do not agree with it. I think it's definitely going backwards. It's a very Magneto-esque argument in an X-Men world. And I don't like it. In terms of political blackness, again, I don't know enough about race politics or identity politics to quite understand that. But when I was talking about blackness in terms of racism, I was talking about it within the context of the South Asian community, in that blackness is seen as something dirty within our community. It's seen as something unfavorable or something ugly in our community, and that's where I use the word blackness, not necessarily in terms of the political movements and stuff that exists now. To discuss police brutality, the first thing I want to say is that police brutality isn't the only systemic racial thing, and I think there are other things that we can talk about. In terms of data, I think that data without context and with it being completely cold and, unrationed can be very, very tricky. To speak about there being a high criminality within Black societies without also thinking about why that might exist and whether that might come out of systemic oppression is also something that needs to be addressed. For example, in the UK, I think that more black students are suspended as compared to white students. And if you look at the numbers in terms of that, if you are suspended from school, or you are, I've forgotten what the word is. As an educator, this is bad.
Expelled?
But expelled, that's it. If you are expelled from school, your likeliness of becoming a convict in future becomes higher. So are criminal levels in black communities, does that exist?
Not as high as having not two parents in the house. That's the single most influential factor to whether you'll end up in jail or not.
Sure,
whether you grow up with two
sure,
parents in your
but I
house.
mean, to continue that, but is there a racial divide within the schooling system? Is there a racial divide in other things that aside from police brutality? And to continue with that, with violent crime, and you saying it's higher for black people, I think that again would be, where does that come from? Why is that an issue? And are those issues being addressed? I think that it's really, really important. Whether or not it's a racial issue, it needs to be addressed. And in terms of brutality isn't purely just shootings. It could be any form of violence towards a civilian by someone in power or a government official like the police. So while the stats talking about police brutality might be with regards to people shooting others, it doesn't necessarily mean that there are other things that can be taken into account, like beatings. For example, George Floyd's death did not occur out of a shooting. It occurred because he was essentially choked to death.
But would be captured under police lethality statistics because it's a death.
Right. But not all of them end in
Which
death.
show the same thing, which shows the same data as what I was saying.
No, I get that. But you can still have people being choked, but that not showing up in the statistics. And also, when we look at statistics like that, for example, if we look at rape statistics, we can probably discern that those aren't going to be accurate because women do not like reporting rape statistics.
Which is why we use violent crime. Faye, which is why we use violent crime, because everybody reports it.
Sure, but in terms of police brutality and the people who survive it, how do we know that those things are being reported, especially when it's your word against a police officer's when they have a certain level of power? I think that is something that deserves to be taken account of. Also, you mentioned that the white man who was shot because he attacked a police officer with a spoon, that was a piece of evidence that you stated. I think that is something that needs to be addressed. That if that is what it takes to get a man shot, is that he flies at you with a spoon, then that is something that is deeply ingrained within the police system, and it's something that needs to change. And also, if that kind of chokehold that George Floyd died under, like as someone who's worked security and also works with people who have mental health issues, I've done a significant level of training for self-defense and for prevention, and if that is something that is if that is what police officers are trained with, then there is something wrong in that system, because there are certain things that I've had to learn about my job and the risks that I undertake that are honestly shocking to me, but they make sense. You can't block someone's air path like that. I've had to sustain bites because it would block somebody's air path to do anything but to sustain it until you get someone else to deal with it. And in addition to that, the police officers who were responsible for George Floyd's death, the man who killed him had 3 counts of brutality before that. Why do we not have a zero tolerance policy for brutality with police officers in the US? Another one of I believe it was the Asian man, I can't remember his name, who was also at the scene of that death.
He also had stats.
He also had a strike. So why is there no zero tolerance policy for that? To say whether or not that was racially motivated, I think we can never truly know.
I mean, that's exactly my point.
We're acting like we do know. We're acting like we do know.
Sure.
But that's my point with the whole, we know there's a problem in the system, in the police system, whether or not it's racism or, like you said, he had 4 accounts or other accounts of being quite aggressive in his ways and killing people. And
sure, I agree with you. That's a point that I'm making, but I'm not quite done. Before this conversation goes on for another 40 minutes without me talking, I just want to finish. So Jimmy also said that there's a high propensity for black-on-black violence. I think that that is a problem and that does need to be addressed. And it's something that people aren't talking about, and I do agree that that needs to be talked about. In terms of generalizations, that all police are racist or all black people or whatever, I think that generalizations is something that we should just avoid entirely. It's not, like, for the sake of a conversation, perhaps, but it is not helpful to generalize communities of people and say that all police are racist or all, you know, black people hate white people or all white people hate black people. I think it's a bad idea.
Exactly.
Obaid said that things have gotten better since the Jim Crow years. Okay, but that doesn't mean that things can't keep getting better. You know, slavery was abolished, I don't even know, donkeys years ago, but that doesn't mean that within 20 years that black people had the rights that they wanted. You know, I think that there is still room for improvement. I think that there are issues that are still worth talking about, and I understand the frustration of the way the media is handling it and the way that it's sort of pigeonholed into issues and the way that speech is being limited. I do not agree with the way that the media is presenting these issues. However, I don't think that just by saying that things have gotten better that we solve the issue. There's clearly an issue going on. In terms of the race traitor stuff that Jimmy brought up, yes, I agree that we should not be treating people who are minorities in opinions like that. And I completely condemn that. I don't like that behavior at all. I think that everyone has a voice and everyone has their opinions and they're allowed to state whatever they feel. Actually, they should state how they feel. Like I said, that's the only way we're going to reach some even marginally good conclusions. The 9 black people who were shot unarmed last year, that's fair enough. I don't know what else to say about that.
I have a small point to add to what Jimmy had said about people calling and like crimes reported in a specific area, which is predominantly black. And I think somebody had said it about it that because I think it's also important to analyze why that specific area has a lot of crimes reported.
Absolutely.
Understanding that they come from a lower socioeconomic background.
Absolutely.
They're also, I think the way this works is that if you're paying low tax in that area, you'll get low schooling system, hence more crimes, more drug-related crimes, because a lot of people are not. And I think that is something that we need to address, that if other people in different parts of the state or the city are getting better education system, and these aren't because they don't have higher income and they're paying lower tax, but it's important that we have some socialist policies in place to then educate that and bring up the level. When I say bring up the level, I mean like the education standards, those health standards, which the US doesn't have, but like those education standards to then minimize what was going to happen other future kids that, you know, the cycle, I feel like the cycle just keeps going on. No education, no better education, becomes criminals, and then, you know, higher crime rates. But I think that what we need to do is like we need to start it from the beginning. Sorry.
The last thing that I would like to address before I make some points of my own, because I've just been addressing points at this point. Okay, like come on, guys. There's 4 of you and there's 1 of me. Okay,
fair enough.
All right.
No, I mean
we're not all aligned. I don't align to a lot of what
Can I please? I'm the minority here. I have privileges. Okay, like can I please talk? All right. So the last thing that I want to address before I start making some points of my own. Some database, some just case studies. So the last thing that I want to address is that Zara said that this is a US issue. Even if I were to agree to disagree that this is just a US issue, that does not mean we can't protest about it. You know, there are several things happening.
We absolutely can.
The way that you phrased that was almost like, oh well, these problems don't exist in Australia.
No,
these problems don't exist in Africa.
No. It's a US issue. But then people who are protesting about it are not addressing the issues they have in their countries.
Exactly.
So if you're talking, that was my point.
Again,
I think like if you're going to talk about race,
Zara,
start
please,
by ones in your country.
Zara, please, you already made the point.
Can I just add very quickly? I'll make it really brief. For example, if people are protesting in the UK, if they're not addressing the UK issues and talking about American issues, that's not really, in my opinion,
it's hypocritical.
It's hypocritical.
I'm not saying you can't do it.
In the Netherlands, we have this Zwarte Piet thing. So if people are protesting about George Floyd,
Sure.
and they're not really talking about Suwata Pete, which is like a mongrel, whatever. It has all these political
Black
debate.
Peter.
Yeah, and if they're not really addressing those issues, but they're going to protest about George Floyd in America, I find it absolutely hypocritical.
I mean,
Zara,
I disagree.
I would
I'm
like
saying
to.
that
I
you
would
can-
like to say that you've clearly stated in the conversation that I've had 12 minutes to talk when the four of you have had an hour. So can I please?
I have barely talked. Can I finish?
I have
So I think people can protest. I'm not saying they can't. They
Sure.
can protest, absolutely protest about it. But then what's happening is they're not trying to bring change in their country. They're trying to bring change in the US without acknowledging their change. But this is what I was trying to say, that the issue is bigger than just George Floyd's death. That this is not going to end overnight. These protests are going to go on, but they're not going to go on for more than a month or two. And that we're not addressing a whole system. And like I said, that nobody's against you, Faye. We have ideas that we disagree. There are ideas that we clearly agree on, and Jimmy and I and Halima and I disagree on. So I don't think it's just
Can I
you versus
talk?
both of us.
Can I just ask a question, Faye? Do you feel like you're being dogpiled?
I don't feel like I'm being comforted. This is giving me PTSD about my family.
Okay, but Faye, I just want to say one thing on my end. Like,
do you feel like you're being
Sure.
dogpiled?
I
this is
don't-
a tough conversation for me as well.
No, but I'm not addressing
I actually
you.
have a lot of respect for Faye. I do understand that she feels very passionate about these issues. I have a lot of respect on that, whatever. But at the end of the day, the way I looked at it, the way I really looked at it, because on my Twitter, there are Black people, Somalis, whatever, who do not like me being an ex-Muslim, and they are calling me coon and whatever the hell, and they're sending me threats and this and that. At the end of the day, as much as a Black person, of course, I want not to be treated differently from any other person. It doesn't necessarily mean that I will jump on that identity block, because my identity is complex. You know what I mean?
I do not expect you to, but okay, can I?
Liberal identity block.
I like that you guys asked me a question and then didn't let me answer it.
I'm gonna let you answer it.
All right. So what I feel like is that there are four of you who are making a lot of points, and I'm not saying they're bad points. I just think that there are a lot of points for me to address, but I have yet to actually make points of my own. And to say, like, for you to just say that I've had 12 minutes to talk when you guys have been talking for a good part of an hour without...
But why are you collectivizing us?
Because you're a collective.
Yeah, we're all different.
I am actively...
I'm actively stopping people so that you get to talk.
You are not actively stopping people so that I can talk.
I did. I told Obaid and Jimmy not to talk. I told them not to talk while Halima addresses, and then you go in. But that's not the point. Faye, go. I'm going to moderate this again, and then we're going to go in a circle. Does that work again?
It's also healthy for us to, ex-Muslims don't have to be monolith, by the way.
I agree.
It's very healthy that we can have different opinions, but at the end of the day, we love each other. That's important.
Sure.
Okay, so let's do this just to make it fair. Faye talk, and then 3 minutes on Obaid talk, and then Jimmy talk, and then if you guys have points to address, instead of interrupting, let's do it after, like Faye did, like she wrote it down. I think that was good. Okay, so Faye, go for it.
Okay.
And I will monitor it.
So, actually, that exclusion stat is actually from a book called Akala's Natives. I can send you the author and the book title afterwards, Jimmy. But the likelihood of Caribbean Black kids of being excluded from schools over white kids is 3 times. Martin Neri, the former director of the General of HM Prison Service, the 13,000 young people excluded from school each year might as well be given a date by which to join the prison service sometime later down the line. 4 out of 1,000 stop and searches of whites, as compared to 38 out of 1,000 stop and searches compared to blacks. That again could be due to crime stats here in the UK, but I don't know. Police brutality. There were only 78 days in 2019 where police did not kill somebody. So police brutality is a problem. Whether or not it's racialized is another conversation. In Buffalo, in New York, 12 out of 1,000 people is the rate of violent crime, and there were no police killings from 2013 to 2016. 99% of killings by police from 2013 to 2016 have not resulted in police officers being charged with a crime. Unarmed black people were killed by police at 5 times the rate of unarmed whites in 2015. Only 13 out of 104 cases in 2015 where an unarmed black person was killed by the police resulted in officers being charged. Only 4 cases have resulted in convictions, and none of these cases resulted in more than 4 years of prison time. Black people were more than 4 times likely than whites to be detained under the Mental Health Act, and that's in the UK. Black women have a significantly higher pregnancy mortality rate than other ethnicities, possibly due to antenatal care here in the UK, and this is being investigated currently by the NHS. There is the existence of white privilege, but we've discussed that already. There are so to compare 2 case studies, in terms of the Central Park joggers, which happened in 1989, teens were given these are black teens that were given an adult sentence for a crime that they were accused of, in which none of their DNA was matched to the ones at the scene. If we compare this to the Brock Turner case, which was a confirmed unconscious rape of a woman with 2 witnesses, and Turner was held at the scene of the crime, he was given 6 months in prison time, whereas the Central Park joggers were given between 5 and 10 years. And by the way, Brock Turner was only held for 3 months, and that was in 2015. The reaction, if we're going to talk about violence within the protests that are currently going on, we also have to consider the reaction to the protests with the use of tear gas, rubber bullets used inappropriately, police officers hiding their badge numbers, undercover officers, and the hijacking of radical parties, as well as Trump's incitement against the protests through his tweets. If we look at Thomas Lane, he was let off after £1 million were raised to get him out of jail. Defendants charged with killing whites in Georgia are 3 times more likely to be sentenced to death as defendants charged with killing blacks. In the McCleskey v. Kemp situation, 6 out of 11 defendants convicted of killing whites would have not gotten the death penalty had their victims been black. 20 out of 34 black defendants would not have received the death penalty had their victims been black. Over 60% of death row inhabitants are black. Pennsylvania, 6% of the black population. I have 1 point left to make. 1990 to 1992, 130 reports of police brutality by Florida University that was recorded. Blacks and Hispanics made up 97% of the victims, while white officers involved were over 93% in the beatings. I'm done.
All right, Obaid.
Okay, I'm not even going to really talk about this racism. What I want to talk about, and I'll touch just 1 or 2 of your little things at the end of this, Faye, but
sure.
I want to talk about critical race theory because I think this is important.
Of course.
Okay. And I want to talk about it as well. And this is the only other thing I want to touch in your video because you mentioned anti-Semitism in your video, and I'll get to this at the end of the critical race theory thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, okay, I'm going to give you a list of books. I don't know if you've read them. I don't know what you guys have read. I don't know what you guys haven't read, but I would start off by reading Derek Bell's original paper from '76. I think it's called Serving Two Masters. That's the thing that started off critical race theory. Okay. Bell brings up some good points. And even at some point where he says people who were saying it's not racist, there was racism. He's just discounting what black people were saying. Right. And this started at Harvard Law School. Kimberly Crenshaw who basically started intersectionality, was a protege of his. She's now to Columbia Law, I believe. Could be wrong about where she is. Now, the books that I want you guys to look at, and I can give you some others, but there's a book called Critical Race Theory by Peggy McIntosh.
Sure.
There's another book called Critical Race Theory, which is the 25 papers that they say helped launched it. Includes Derek Bell's paper and includes Kimberly Crenshaw's paper. Then I want you to then I started focusing on a lot of this stuff. There's a book called Being Good, Being White by Barbara Applebaum. There's Good White People by Sullivan. White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. Acting White. Now, there's 2 books called Acting White. One's by something Buck, that was written a while ago that's supposedly really good. I haven't read it. There's another one by Gaudo and something else. Now the book by Gaudo and someone else. Okay, I just want to focus that on 1 second, because this is being taught to kids kindergarten through grade 12. Okay, and you were talking about black kids being suspended more and stuff like that. This is being taught to the administration now. This was taught in Canada in high schools in a few provinces and middle schools as early as 2013. Now it's being taught K through 12.
Sure.
Some of the things out of acting white, there's whole sections in it on how Obama acted white, and if you're black, you should not act like Obama. New York City school districts, they're having lectures for the administrators telling them that being on time is acting white. So if your students of color are late or they hand in assignments late, don't suspend them, don't punish them, because that's a cultural thing. Okay,
you have half a minute left. Just
okay,
letting you know.
Okay, but that's racism. That's critical race theory. So Faye, Black Lives Matter, Toronto, the leadership. This is not members. This is the leadership.
Sure.
Okay. White people are less than human. Their DNA is not proper. White people should be killed. Okay. Black Lives Matter, Dallas, the 6 police officers that got shot, the sniper, that was part of Black Lives Matter Dallas. All right. Black Lives Matter, again, like I said, has supported segregation on campuses. So no, I cannot wholesale support that organization. I think there's a lot of bad in there. I
disagree with all of that.
But okay. And as for your point, when I said things are getting better,
yeah,
I said things were getting better and they were so much better. I said, but we'd gotten to the point where we could talk about the residual things in the system that were left over.
Sure.
But then right away, everyone went to critical race theory. And it's the wrong way to do this. And I'm just saying, let's get back to where we were and dump this garbage. Just 10 seconds. Your terms of anti-racism and things like that comes straight from critical race theory.
Agreed.
Okay. If you want to use those terms, I suggest you read that stuff to find, because if someone says Islam is a religion of peace, you're saying read the Quran, right? So just read the books. I told you, go find other books on critical race theory. Go ahead. I mean, I don't care. Just read them all. They all say the same thing. That's it.
Can you link
I'll write the
please.
books again. And there's a website called New Discourses, and Jim Lindsay has done a lot of work on this. I mean, Helen Pluckrose and Peter Boghossian have done a lot of work, but Jim Lindsay on this website, and he goes through all these terms and he takes blackness or anti-racism and he says, here are the links, here's the books I've read, this is where I'm taking it from.
Yeah,
it's all there.
Please do put the titles in the group chat afterwards.
Yeah, I'll put all the titles of the books and everything.
Thank you.
All right, Jimmy, you have 3.5 minutes.
Okay, I'm starting my stopwatch. So I just want to separate two things out. And I said this at the start, I just want to talk about police brutality. So if what you're saying to me is actually increased criminality is due to socioeconomic factors within a society, maybe that's true. And maybe those are systemic. So maybe systemic racism in wider society causes increased criminality in Black communities, That doesn't mean that the police is systemically racist by going to those crimes. That's my point.
Oh, no.
Systemic racism might exist everywhere else.
I agree.
But when the police go to a crime, they're going because of data. They're going because Black people are calling them and saying there's a crime going on. So that doesn't mean that the police is systemically racist. And that's my point. So pointing out, leveling these fingers at the police, saying, you're racist, you're just after Black people, you're just trying to harm Black people. No, they're following the crime. If you want to have a wider conversation about is crime because of socioeconomic factors, great, we can have that conversation at a later date. In addition to that, I think it's worth considering Obama's speech in 2018, where he said that if you don't have two parents in the house, you're 20 times more likely to end up in jail. And we know that 70% of Black families don't have two parents in the house in the USA, which is a huge percentage. And I just want to talk about something, two other points, right? Because I've got 2 minutes left. So one is this idea that police are all liars and are faking stuff and covering for each other. And I think there's an absurdity there for me
That's just a conspiracy theory. Don't like that.
Questioning the police's honesty, but believing all of the criminals.
Yeah.
Like, for me, that's mind-blowing, Like, actually, all of the criminals who are committing crimes are saying the police are hitting me, and we're going to say, oh, the police are covering up the stats, but it's not the criminals who are lying. Whose integrity am I more likely to believe here? I'd say the police most of the time, And then the last point is just something called the Ferguson effect. And I think if we look at the data, it is still out on this, but some people say that this is the truth, is we're launching a war on cops, guys. There's no getting away from it. You're saying police are racist, they're attacking black people, and therefore, police are bad, bad, bad. Defund the police is something that Black Lives Matter are saying. So something called the Ferguson effect, which I think was around 2014, when there was another high-profile black death at the hands of the police, is that actually what happens then is relationships break down between minority communities and the police to such an extent that people stop reporting the crimes, and to such an extent that where the police feel like, you know what, being called to the scene of this crime, it sounds like it's going to be a violent crime. If I show up there, I'm going to have to use my gun, but then what's going to happen is the whole media spotlight's going to be on me, and I'm going to get dragged through the coals. And so as a result, police stop proactive policing, they stop policing effectively, and then what happens is death rates in minority communities go up because all of that gang violence isn't being policed in a way that it should. So think about what we're doing when we demonize the police force, the negative effect that it has on our own communities where crime is the highest. And just to give you an example of that, we know with honor violence, actually, it's the white policeman who comes and saves us. We know that with LGBT issues in Muslim communities,
Agreed.
It's the white policemen who come and save us.
Okay, your time out, Halima. Sorry, so after Halima, we're gonna take questions, and if you have questions for specific people, please tag me and then their name. That way we can take the questions. So we have 65 people live now. I don't know if everybody's asking, but we'll take questions for another 15 minutes if that's okay with everybody. Okay, cool. Halima, go next. You have about 3 minutes.
For me, I think the important issue is to separate issues, problems from skin color, first of all. And even if the problems have originated from systemic prejudices and this and that, we need to do that. We need to separate issues. First, for me, the most important thing is human rights. So we're talking about LGBT rights, we're talking about ex-Muslims, we're talking about, they call it people of color, I don't like that term, but but when you make that a politicized identity issue, what happens to then those of us who don't necessarily fit that little box? I may have this black skin color, but when I am talking to people who are right now advocating for the Black Lives Movement, they don't want to hear my story, and that's a fact, right? They don't want to hear the fact that I am an ex-Muslim. And I worry when then this Black Lives Movement in itself that's happening all across the world is there are Islamists that are being given platforms in the Black Lives Movement who are speaking, and they wouldn't like somebody like me. Do you understand? And then that it becomes a dangerous trend of boxing an identity. Do you understand? And I find it hypocritical in the sense that the issues themselves are not being dealt with. For example, if you have to look at prejudices and you have to look at stereotypes and all this and that, but you also have to look at nuance. You have to look at, and but by nuance that can come from an educational level. It can come from if this person is a non-religious. It doesn't matter. It can come from, for example, a black person who is doing well and they worked hard and this and that. That black person sometimes would be wondering, well, no, and then you have maybe crime or for example, recently I was cancelled on Twitter or social media because simply what I did, there were placards and signs that were appearing that were prejudiced, and all I did was translate them. That's all I did. I didn't put an opinion. I translated what was basically hate towards white people. And I don't agree with that. And I make it really personal even. There's a couple of people who, are even from the ex-Muslim Somali community who were counseling me, and they were like, why do you need to do this? You're a snitch, you're a coon, you're a Uncle Tom, whatever. And I was like, okay, let's make it personal. Your friend who went with you to that Black Lives Matter protest, they're carrying this sign. They support the cause. How would you feel? How does it make you feel that they're carrying a sign that says, and I'll say it in Somali, by the way, Adanka Haladilo.
What does that mean?
That means white people should be killed. Why would, those are things that I find absolutely disgusting. I find it also absolutely disgusting when white protesters in a protest sit down and wash the feet of Black people. What are we saying? That it's a reverse? That white people now have to be enslaved? Bullshit.
Okay. After this, we'll be taking questions. So I have about 3 minutes, and I am timing myself like I did everybody else. I just thought I would make certain positions and clarifications on what I have said. I am specifically saying white privilege doesn't exist for every white person. And specifically in the case of George Floyd, I don't think it was a racist attack. But just with Halima, what you said in terms of, how Somali people were holding those signs. My question is, if the opposite was done, would that be agreeable? If a white person was holding that sign about Black people, is that agreeable, even if it's joking? Right? That is all my baseline is. Like, if you're doing it, is it okay for the other person to do it? So if a Black cop kills a Black victim, is that still racism? Or if a white cop kills a Black victim, that's the only time it's racism? I don't think it was a racist attack, mysteries, but I don't think it was a racist attack. I'm not saying that there haven't been racially attacked. That doesn't mean that racism does not exist. That doesn't mean that prejudice against Black people or people of color or white people doesn't exist. It does exist. But this was specifically talking about, well, one, this started off with a disagreement that I have 1 minute left. This started off with a disagreement with ex-Muslims wanting to be a monolith. And yes, there are ex-Muslims who are far right or who don't represent us or who are anti-Muslim bigots, but I haven't excluded them. I just disagree with them because I can't tell somebody who can and who cannot be part of the ex-Muslim movement or what the movement means for different people. Different people have their own, I guess, meaning to the movement. And all of this started is when ex-Muslims started siding with each other, calling each other names, smearing each other, and then taking it a step forward and then, making it into like a whole division between people. And I think it's perfectly fine that two people can disagree, even if all we have in common here is that we're ex-Muslims. That's it. We don't have our backgrounds in common. We don't have our ideas. My experiences are not yours. My experiences are not growing up in the West. I have seen racism from Black people who now want me to support Black Lives Matter as a bigger movement when they're also colluded with Antifa. I'm not going to do that. And they're causing violence. I'm not going to do that. I've always been against violence and vandalism. As a person who has grown up every day of my life at night, what Black people say they feel in the US, that was me. I couldn't go outside my house because it was not safe, not because my parents stopped me to. So I have been on that reversing. So I hate racism on all accounts. We're now taking questions. So whoever has posted questions before, I would say post it again.
Can I just say one thing? I'll be 10 seconds while
10
people are writing questions. Right?
Yeah.
The
Questions
white privilege thing. Just, and this is not attacking or anything, Faye, or whatever. But people are saying that. People are saying, and there was an article in Medium, there's sociology papers, there's PhD papers written about homeless white people having more privilege than professional Black people because they're white. So it's not in just similar classes. This, again, is coming from critical race theory. Honestly, Faye, if you want to sit down, and I'm not by means any expert in this stuff, I've just read it, and I've rotted my brain. I'll be happy to sit down. We can have a Skype call, and I can go through a lot of this crap and maybe you don't have to read the books, but I suggest you do if you don't want to be part of it. But that was my thing.
Sure.
Okay, Faye, this is a question for you.
Okay.
I've put it up.
We're trying to delve more into the war on drugs as an explicit example of targeting minorities. It's a war that has hurt communities to this day. Honestly, I don't know enough about it to really answer that question.
Can I touch one thing on that? Because a lot of people pick up a statistic of crack cocaine having more, like powder cocaine has a lesser charge than crack cocaine. Crack cocaine was used more by black people. And that was one of the reasons why there's a lot of policing. Like these are cities and states that were Democrat for 60 years. They've had black mayors and black police chiefs. They begged the federal government for policing because of the crack problem. And this was during the Reagan eras where it was say no to drugs. And, I'm an old man and I'm letting my age show here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it was that. Methamphetamine, okay, so crystal meth, Breaking Bad and all that stuff. That is predominantly used by whites as opposed to blacks. And the statistics I'm remembering are from a couple of years ago. That could have changed. The sentencing for crystal meth is the exact same as the sentencing for crack cocaine, right? Because they consider it the same class of drug. The problems with marijuana that started with reefer madness in the 30s, and yes, there was a bit of racism, and there was also stuff to do with stuff against Mexicans. So there is some of that issue. And I don't agree with the war on drugs. I think it should be more of a treatment-based thing. I don't think that let people run around and buy heroin. It's an issue. Don't treat them as criminals. Treat them as people with medical issues. And then if you legalize pot, I think people say legalize everything. We can get into that argument, or at least decriminalize. But I think drugs should be dealt more with as a medical issue and as a treatment issue than as a policing. Okay, if you're high on crack and you start breaking windows, that's a criminal thing. Sorry.
Okay. Oh, good. I just want to put the next question out. Would Jimmy and Faye agree on anything in this discussion if the phrase is changed from police brutality to use of excessive force by police?
So you want to go first, Faye? Should I go first?
I think we do agree that police need some level of reform. I don't think that we're completely against that, especially in the States.
No, I think.
But go ahead. Sorry.
So I don't think we agree. Actually, I think we're on polar opposites ends of the spectrum.
Okay.
And that's okay. I think my opinion is very much data driven. I look at the numbers.
Sure.
I appreciate for a lot of people in the chat and here, and for myself, it's really emotive. Like saying the numbers I'm saying don't make me feel good. Make me feel quite sad. Make me feel like people are going to judge me as a racist because I'm talking about numbers.
Sure.
I feel like it's incredible. Actually, to pat myself on the back, I feel like it was quite incredibly brave for me to say some of the stuff that I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe, Faye, why some of us didn't speak up at the start was because we were scared about being called a racist. And it's okay to get called a racist when we're criticizing Islam because that's our community. But getting called a racist when I'm talking about black criminality is a different issue. And also I've seen on social media how many people have lost their jobs and such. Yeah.
Sure.
So I think we're polar opposites apart and completely comfortable. We have different positions on that. I feel like my information is data driven. And when Ali says if we use of excessive force by police, I think there's a distinction there, because when a policeman is shooting somebody because they've got a gun, that's not excessive force to me. Even the man charging the man with a spoon, when you're charging the policeman with a spoon in a country where everybody has guns and you're therefore resisting arrest, and that policeman pulls out, has to make a split-second decision, my life or yours, I question whether that's excessive force as well, because he could have ended up dead if that was a gun. So when the police come to you and say, we're coming here to arrest you, do what you should do, which is put your hands up and comply, and you're less likely to get hurt.
Sure. I would still argue that the spoon thing and him being shot for that, it's still excessive in my opinion. But I mean, I don't think we I don't think we agree in much if you don't think that is brutality.
We just have a super chat, which I'll pull up first by Apostate Prophet. I love very much so. And then we're going to go back to the list of questions that everybody. I agree with everyone. Don't know who said what, but it doesn't matter. In fact, does anything matter at all? But we love you. We know what you mean. Okay, so I guess this is an open question to all. Do you think police brutality in US is connected with gun laws, i.e. the police shoots first in part because they don't want to risk being shot? Yeah, I do agree there's a connection there. Does anybody disagree? Do they have their
Okay.
views?
I think gun laws are a
I
part of it.
absolutely agree.
Okay,
Sorry. Go on.
no, but I believe gun laws are a part of it. But I think there is another issue here,
Mhm.
and I'm going to harp on this, and it's, a broken record or whatever. But if you're continuously told that the police are there to harass you, right? You're going to have a bad idea about the police. So I think the media plays an important thing. But I want to talk about the statistics just for a second. Okay, I'm going to use this has nothing to do with crime or violence or whatever. This is traffic stop statistics that someone took in New Jersey from a couple of years ago, and I don't have the exact numbers, but I'm in there. So something like black people were. They self-reported that they sped 35% of the time, and this is self-reporting, so obviously problems. But they said they were speeding on a regular basis 35% of the time. For speeding stops, 25% of the stops were black people. So black people were there, based on their self-reporting, were underrepresented in what was stopped. Now, just because that means it's an underrepresentation, if one of those black people has a horrible experience because of the cop, he doesn't give a rat's ass about the experience. Like, he doesn't care about the statistics. For that black person, that was a horrible experience with a cop, and that statistic, that's not statistically significant. It doesn't mean anything. So like I said, yes, we can talk about statistics. It's a great way to start, but I think that's why I like the talks that John McWhorter and Glenn Lowry have. I put in a link to a tweet that I did earlier today. It's got a list of 7 talks, and there's a couple of talks between John McWhorter and Glenn Lowry. They discuss things like this. There's an importance with the police brutality or excessive force or whatever you want to call it, as opposed to stopping people, as opposed to harassing. And there is some data, and I don't have it in front of me, and I can't give it. Sorry about that, Jimmy, but there is some data that there is more harassment of black people by police. But then again, that could deal with criminality. Why are you going there more? No, I agree with you there. I'm not arguing. But like I said, but again, this is coming from people like John McWhorter and Glenn Lowry, who are very measured on this. Okay, so when they say this, not that I believe them implicitly, right, or explicitly, I'll give it a little bit more credence, and I'll go look into it a little bit more. If Sarsour said this, I'd probably just say screw it. Sorry, I'm done.
All right, we have a next question, quick on this. Is mob rule to be preferred over a broken system? Is there a silver lining or a balanced path between the two? Should it all burn before it can all be made right?
I think those are very. I think those are very extreme ideas.
I was just gonna.
I don't like either of them.
I don't think
very Antifa.
Part of a broken system. For example, of course, there are problems that need to be addressed. However, especially in the current news that we're seeing in America, where there are autonomous zones, they call it.
Yeah.
I find that extremely dangerous, actually. So dangerous that, because of course you see a lot of things on social media, some are true, some are not, but when you have in a free country, in a democratic zone, even if things are not perfect, where there's an autonomous zone, personally I look at it like, what, really? Because what this does, then it also opens to autonomous Islamist zones, Sharia zones, whatever. You'd never know. You understand? It's dangerous.
All right.
So
I have a question for Faye.
Faye has argued for police brutality and not touched on whether it's motivated by race, and Jimmy has rejected police brutality is motivated by race without rejecting police brutality's existence in the US. I don't think I didn't touch on it. I just don't know if that's what's running police brutality. I think there is police brutality, But whether or not it's motivated by race, you can't really know, because it would be, you would have to assess that on an individual level, and there's no way of doing that.
This was part one to his question. Sorry,
Yeah.
I put the other way around.
No worries.
But I think you did answer it. So I'm just gonna put the next question up there. I do like this comment. We've read the numbers and statistics, doesn't mean we have the same conclusions. I agree. Stats is objective, and a lot of our views will be subjective. It's also based on our experience, our personal experience, and our knowledge about the context. Does anybody else see a question? Okay, okay. This was for you, Jimmy.
Sorry, I don't know who Martin Guigino is, so I'm not
I think
really able to
it's
comment.
probably a case study. I haven't heard this name either.
I don't know. I don't know about that specific person, but in terms of police brutality, I don't think it is a thing based on the data that I've got. I think if what you're saying is particularly racialized police brutality, even more, if you're saying that there's 9 people who are black and unarmed were killed in the whole of 2019, out of 44 million people, you're doing a poor job of police brutality. You really need to up your game, actually. Like if you were giving out awards on police brutality, they wouldn't get one.
I would like to answer this. How has data been gathered? Who gathered it? Also, silent evidence is a thing. And yes, that is a thing. As a data analyst who does mostly quantitative and sometimes qualitative analysis, you will always get a bias in the data. The only way to not have a bias is to purely conduct it on numbers and state your base for it. And this can go either way, right? Maybe we'll have more data that will support a counter narrative than what we all have right now. So given the data that we do have, people can draw conclusions from it. Most studies also conclude with there could be more research that we can do on the specific topic or not. Jimmy, go for it.
So I think when we're talking about data, it's not as simple as people just getting the data that's input into a system by the police or Department of Justice or whatever. We have to look at the peer-reviewed studies that come out of it. So people look at that data, they produce a study and a report from it, and then they give it to their peers who are also academics, who then review that, critically assess it, and then say whether they think it makes sense or not. So the studies, so the numbers that I'm citing are cited in studies. And if you want to watch something else on this topic, which is quite interesting, you can watch Atheist Republic did a very similar debate to this a few days ago, where they just go simply into police brutality. They simply look at the studies. They even give you the name of the studies that are cited, and they found the same conclusions that I found.
Just for a name on the study, I think the best one is like Fryer or something like that, or Fry. That's like one of the best studies that they had out there. I'm forgetting the name off the top of my head. Sorry.
Jimmy spoke about police brutality and argued that it was acceptable if it happens to everyone. Just wanted clarity on that.
So I never argued that police brutality is ever acceptable for anyone. If that's what you think I said, you need to rewind after this goes up on YouTube and revisit what I said. I was saying that actually, when we look at the rates of the number of people killed, because there's, in 2015, because there was 26% of the people who died were black, it will look like it's double the rate of the population. I'm not saying that if it was 13%, it would be okay that that number of people died. I'm saying the argument would be that that would be disproportionate, but it's not disproportionate when we look at criminality and criminal activity. Hope that clears that up.
Okay, yep. There's another, I'm taking 5 other questions. Okay, how is policing and policing problems different in the US, UK, and Canada? I can talk about Australia.
I can touch US and Canada if you guys want some stats. Okay. This was from the Washington Post. This was what John McWhorter was talking about in that debate. This was what he was using in an article he just wrote for Colette. And now these are stats from 2015 till June 9th of this year. So, excuse me, 5,302 deaths by police. 2,990 were black. 1292 were black, 901 were Hispanic, 47 were Native American. 77 were Native American, 41 were other, and one just had race. So that's in 5 years you had 5,302 shootings, so roughly 1,000 a year. In Canada, the only statistics I could find for shootings between 2000 and 2017, we had 450 some odd shootings, so not a lot. Yet our Prime Minister, our shoe polish model in chief, has decided that we have a police racism problem in Canada. We don't. I mean, I wouldn't even call that a police violence problem. I don't know about people being beaten up or whatever, but there's your stats for U.S. and Canada for as far as deaths go.
What about the UK, guys? You guys have lived here longer.
I don't know too much about it, if I'm being completely honest with you.
Especially in comparison.
Let me give you some data, because that's what I like to bring. So of the deaths in the last 10 years in terms of police custody, 140 people were white, 13 people were black, and 10 were from other minority ethnic groups. So over the past 10 years, 163 people have died in or following police custody in England and Wales, according to the Independent Office for Police Conduct, the body responsible for police complaints. Death in custody is a term for anybody who dies while in the custody of the state. This could include while being detained by a police officer or being held a prisoner or anything like that. But the numbers again for you, because the numbers are important. 140 were white, 13 were black. So if you're looking at black people, that's 1.3 black people died in police custody each year over the 10 years. Again, if you think that's police brutality, I think you need to assess what police brutality is. One person dying a year in police custody.
Can I just, on police brutality, a policeman is brutal to someone, that is police brutality. If you want to talk about statistics, is it systemic brutality throughout the police? Is it systemic racism throughout the police? Yes. Individual racist police officer, individual police officer who's brutal. When the numbers are that small, I think you can say, yes, there is incidents of brutality, but it's not a systemic police brutality problem. Because to say it doesn't exist at all is also a little false.
Okay, some questions are repeated. Somebody just came on board to say that why do ex-Muslims use their ex-Muslims as the tag as we do? I like how that was the only thing that person had to contribute.
Yeah.
What was the question again?
It was just like, why do ex-Muslims put ex-Muslims in their tag? Because I have it in the title, because you're all ex-Muslims. That's what I was trying to say. That's the only thing we have in common amongst other things, but like as a denominator. Okay. This is possibly our last question, because I don't think anybody has tagged me otherwise.
What is the panel's opinion on the use of ethnic rivalry as a means of social policy? Rome makes the ethnic groups to keep them fighting instead of being mad at Rome. Does the US do the same? I think that question falls...
Can I speak about that in terms of history?
Sure.
But Faye, you go on first.
Okay, so for that question falls too much into like conspiracy theory area for me to take it seriously. I don't know if, like, I've heard a lot that the US is just trying to create a race war, and I don't know if that is the case, but I mean, it's certainly been used before, like with the British Empire and India and things like that, but I don't know. I feel like that's something you would only really know after the fact.
There is somebody who said that. As an ex-Muslim myself, I get embarrassed that people like this who deny systematic racism existing speak for us. Nobody speaks for you. I think everybody speaks for themselves. We do call ourselves ex-Muslims, and we're entitled to have different opinions and views. And then Dusty Foot came back again. Ex-Muslims don't agree on anything except their kufr, not surprised.
As if Muslims agree on everything.
Yeah, I think it's actually healthy that we can have different opinions, but at the same time, we keep it civil, we keep it the love, we keep it, I think it's healthy. What I don't agree with is groupthink and
I
to
agree.
be bullied into a groupthink. I don't like that, and it's okay for us to have different opinions on different issues that affect society. In
I had
different societies we live in.
Can I just say one thing to Ghada's comment there? Tell her she's being ageist.
Yeah, Ghada. Okay, I absolutely love Ghada, but back to Halima's point, yes, we're all, I think Jimmy's tired and I'm hungry as well, but there's one last question which speech, it's not a question, it's a comment which ends all of this, which is great, because I love that comment, but just to agree with Halima's point, I do think that we're all very different, and we're allowed to have different views, and having, like, most of us have been ostracized from our family groups or friends, the last thing we should be doing is act very similarly. And cult thinking or group thinking, I think we're better than that, which is why I personally like taking space from people just for a thinking time. I just think that we're better than cutting people out or asking people to be an activist in their way, or talk about specific issues. I think we're all different and we should celebrate that. This is the last question, and I really like this because it ends everything. Beach, I love Beach. Can everyone end on an agreement that the problem in the US are not just about one issue?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course.
I think it's more than race, it's more than police brutality. It's the US.
Okay,
And
okay, I will say when I'm saying this stuff in the media and all that, I think that is a huge contributor at the way we look at all the other things. I think that stuff contributes how we look at poverty, education, policing, all that. But that is, like creating the narrative around that, like how the narrative got created around Islam, that is causing more harm, and it's not letting us have honest discussions and important discussions and discussions that matter and discussions that will make a change on the issues of education, poverty, policing, socioeconomics, urban planning, all that. I think that is not the issue. That's not causing it, but that's the key issue stopping us from causing it. Stopping us from solving it.
all right, Jimmy, go, and then we're ending.
So I think, there's a lot of criticism in the chat about the data isn't accurate. So the data we have is the best data that we have, however it's compiled, but whatever level of compilation that is, it's more reliable than your subjective experience. Yeah, than individual people saying, this is what happened to me. The data sets that we have are more reliable, more robust, more thorough. They've been peer reviewed. The studies have been peer reviewed. Some of them are published by universities, top universities, saying that that is less valuable than Bob saying the policeman was racist to me is absurd. And I appreciate it's an emotional conversation, but we have to go with the data. And I don't speak for ex-Muslims anyway. So somebody said, you're embarrassed that I'm speaking for ex-Muslims. Don't be embarrassed by me. I'm not speaking by you. I don't know who for you. I don't know who you are. We're here talking about police brutality, whether it's a thing or not. I'm giving my opinion based on the research that I've done. Not speaking for you at all.
All right, I guess this marks the end of it. I think at some point we should do more of these on different issues. I think it's good, it's healthy, and it just shows that we're not a monolith. And you know what? I have learned a lot. Definitely get to see the comments as well. And I just think this makes us closer as a family that we already are. And Obaid, obviously, on the other side of the world, you're welcome to join our little family. Yep. Bye, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Feel free to share.
See you later, everyone.
Bye.
Goodbye, guys. Thank you.
Wait, stay. I'm ending the broadcast, but stay.